Hello, my Richies, and welcome back to another episode of the Make Life Rich Movement podcast. My name is Sarah. I'm your host. And in today's episode, we are talking about how you can get along with everyone by praying for your enemies. I'm going to be honest with you. This has been very difficult for me to grasp, especially on my faith journey. And if you are anything like me, you may find such comfort in judging those that are so different from you, even vehemently so, to where, their violence, their aggression, their anger makes it feel like a safe decision to make, namely your judgment or your chiding of their behavior. And on my faith journey and in becoming a Catholic, it's become abundantly clear to me that this has been the absolute wrong thing for me to have been doing my whole life. And in efforts of working on that for myself, I thought this might be a great episode to bring to you in case you find yourself on a mission to not only have more leniency for your enemies, but also to find it within your heart to pray for them to become better people. There was a coworker once upon a time who made my life absolutely miserable. She would undermine me in meetings. She took credit for my work, something that she wasn't even capable of doing in any single sphere of the matrix she may have found herself in. She was spreading rumors to my higher ups. I spent months plotting how I could get her fired for all of these things, thinking that me showing my boss the terrible ways in which she was behaving, especially as my superior, would render them speechless, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, she's gone. But it wasn't, not only was it a ridiculous thought, it was one that when executed ended up getting me fired, because I realized that not only was the way that she existed the tone of the company for all of the employees around me, my coworkers, but it was also the way in which the owners of the companies operated. And I, as the ugly duckling in the whole scenario, with my behavior being completely different, was actually ostracized. And I now look at it as such a blessing, but at the time it was a really great job. I had a great title, I had a great paycheck, got to travel the country twice every month to be able to go and do different things for this job. Ultimately, the things of the world that kept me there, the paycheck, the perks of travel, the title, were absolutely not worth the mental and emotional turmoil that was being pushed upon me by this mentally unwell woman. And I say that with all kindness. She's actually mentally unwell. That really just targeted me as a problem because of the honest way in which I operated within my position within the company. And often I think about her, not too often these days, but there did come a moment where all I could feel for this woman was just intense pity. Her family life was an absolute mess, which had to have led to her just feeling really crappy about herself. And as a mother of children, she definitely confided in a lot of us about all the things that had gone wrong in her household and in her life. And instead of feeling pain for her and finding sympathy for her in those moments, I would judge her. And I would think, lady, you're reaping what you sow here, like you're the problem. How do you not see you're the problem? You're blaming it on everyone in your household but yourself. Instead of thinking, my goodness, how hard was your life that you are in this position and in this place, and you're not able to see the ways in which you are ultimately bringing this upon yourself, and finding it within me to not only be kind to her, but go the extra mile to make sure that my interactions with her would make her day better, not becoming her, her match partner of like going back and forth arguing about what's the right thing to do, and you messed this up, and you're blaming me for this and that. It was a righteous fest on my end, to where I needed to be right more than I needed to be humble and to be kind to someone that clearly needed love and support. I have since tried to make amends, at least with myself, about that situation and promised that I would never do that again. Not only was it a low blow for me to think of this woman who's in such turmoil and very, very seriously could not handle the stress of the job, much less what was happening in her personal life, I should have been a lot kinder to her, and I am making certain moving forward that I am that for others when I can see that their bad behavior against me is not a measure of me, it's a measure of them and their current levels of happiness and love and support in their own life. There is a time in our life when Everyone seems to be at war with someone. We see it continually on reality TV. It is the anchor of the storyline for most of our shows that we watch, that we kind of disassociate from our regular lives for and tune into because it feels familiar, because we've all been in this space. Family members not speaking, neighbors feuding, coworkers undermining each other. Social media and these types of television programs have made it easier than ever to turn disagreements into lifelong enemies, and harder than ever to find common ground with difficult people, which should be our ultimate goal. There is no peace in this world if we are not in a space to be able to find common ground with someone different than us. What if there was a way to transform your most challenging relationships while also transforming your heart and your mind? This was a question that I asked of myself, and it didn't really happen in the package in which I just presented it to you until about 11 months ago, when I started reading the Bible and beginning my journey with Jesus, which has ultimately led me to being an OCIA and becoming a Catholic. And I want to give you a few promises for this episode today, because on this continual journey that I am on, and I believe I will be on for the remainder of my days on this earth, we're going to explore how praying for your enemies changes both them and you, and why this practice is actually cutting edge psychology and a bit of like biology wrapped in spiritual wisdom given to us by God to pray for our enemies. So what are some of the key topics we're going to touch on just to kind of make this all feel right and be something that you can start implementing into your life today? First, we're going to have a little bit of psychological insight. We're going to show the scientific basis for why enemy love works. Next, spiritual transformation. Centering everything in your relationship with Jesus and divine empowerment really does spare you from the triviality of human interaction within a world-based view. Practical application is going to help provide concrete steps for implementing enemy love daily into your life without putting you in a dangerous space, without putting you in a space where you are not honoring your worth and your value. We are simply looking to free ourselves from the judgment of others that is mainly a prison and a trap for ourselves, that sets us into a rumination of these negative, unhealthy thoughts that are not helping your situation and are only keeping you absolutely feet planted in the place of hurt that will ultimately lead to shame because of the judgment you are passing on others. We're going to discuss the mindset evolution, and we're going to demonstrate how enemy love changes your entire view of the world and the way in which you desire to act within it and be a part of it. Community impacts that are going to show how individual transformation affects entire environments. And finally, hope and possibility. We want to maintain encouraging tones about our relationships that we find difficult with the hope of transformation potential. Now, in all of this, I want you to not consider this or the actions that will come from this if you're trying to change in your daily life. You are not becoming a pushover. In fact, you are implementing boundaries within yourself, self-imposing how you want to behave with others that will hopefully lead to a change in that relationship or a change in the framework of the ideology around maybe a culture or a type of person that you feel is your enemy, and ultimately lead to hope being restored and peace becoming the way of the world. It's a really, really big task, but we can get miles and miles and miles of work done by just taking one step a day and being kinder to those we consider different than us or our enemies. Now, let's jump right into what about our psychological wirings lead other people we consider difficult to trigger us so deeply. And I know trigger is a very overused word, but if your coworker pisses you off and you are ready to rage war, my friend, you've been triggered, and you are the only one in control of unleashing that beast and allowing your cortisol to flare up and your brain to start ruminating on what you're going to say to them during lunch and blah, 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 blah. Like, you don't need it. It's not helping anything. It's only keeping you in a place of negative output making your soul dim to what the pure gift and opportunities in front of you that were given to you by God when you were born. And ideally, it's leading you away from living a moralistic and peaceful life. Now, what is the mirror effect? Difficult people reflect often, most times, our own unhealed wounds and insecurities. The people who trigger you most intensely often display qualities that you struggle with and are not comfortable with admitting to yourself. And these are oftentimes, if it's not something you're actively afraid of within you, it might be something you're worried about becoming. Your strongest emotional reactions to others usually reveal more about your internal wounds than their actual poor behavior. This is so hard to see, so hard to hear, and I struggle with this on the daily, especially with family members and just trying to keep my head above water and not succumbing to blaming them for things, but rather stopping immediately in the moment when I feel this trigger pop up and say, what about this is pissing me off? What about this is already within me that I don't like about myself and I'm not willing to take a look at and do something about with me, because we cannot do anything about the other person or their behavior. We can only inspire them with changes we make inside of ourselves. And that was something that was really big for me to grasp. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And often it takes that first horse being brave to test the puddle to make sure there's nothing in there that's going to get them. And then the other horses follow suit. We have to be that horse. We have to be that first brave horse that's going to take a lap out of the pool, or the lake rather, and make sure there's no alligators or oogly booglies that are going to pop up and get the horse and the horses around us. We also are just projection machines. And these mechanisms that are found within projecting our insecurities onto others is ideally how we transfer our internal conflicts onto external targets. When you're battling self-hatred, you often find yourself hating others more easily. When you're struggling with fear, other people's confidence threatens you, and the like, with very many different characteristics that we find in people every day. The enemy that you see in someone else is sometimes the enemy that you're fighting within yourself, projected outwards where it feels safer to attack rather than on your own self, on your own beliefs, on your own mindset, on your own habits, the way you live and exist within the world. And there's a lot of bravery here in, again, stopping when you see yourself being angry at someone doing something. Let's say one of your kids didn't clean up after themselves and they left the counter a mess. And then you come in angry, you're hot, you're fuming, you're cleaning it up. I'm going to tell them when they get home from school, they have to clean up their breakfast crumbs before they leave. And then you yourself make a sandwich at lunch, you get distracted. Oops, the laundry has gone off, I've got to go switch it. And you left your crumbs. And then you come back to that counter later and you get ready. They left their crumbs. I left the crumbs. Whoo, I better chill. I'm so quick to shout at them and put them in their place when I'm doing the same thing. We're often shielded by our psyche from seeing the ways in which we are doing the same exact things that we want to condemn others for so quickly. I say this with the utmost humility because that exact scenario was about my mother and some crumbs and me and some crumbs. And once that clicked for me, there was a quick burst of shame, and then I just started laughing, and I realized crumbs aren't that serious. I can ask her once to clean up the crumbs, but if it doesn't happen, somebody's got to clean up the crumbs, and I guess it's going to be me. There's also the whole entire world within us of child programming and the early experiences that create adult relationship patterns that we weren't really privy to or consciously aware of being implemented into us because of how young we were when it happened. This is why inner child work is so important. And if you find yourself on that journey, I have over a dozen guided visualizations, anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, that are going to help you to be able to get to the root of the cause for any certain thing that you've been through in your life. And they are dispersed throughout the podcast, both on YouTube and Spotify. And I will tag some in the Spotify episodes so you can find them more readily if you are looking for that kind of resource. Your reactions to difficult people are often shaped by unresolved conflicts that happened in your childhood with your parents, your siblings, early authority figures like teachers, coaches, bus drivers, like you never know. Adult enemies frequently represent archetypal figures from your childhood, and the critical parent, the competitive sibling, the rejecting peer group, the overly harsh teacher that hated their job and decided your sweet little self was going to be who they took it out on. All of these things led to you shrinking, led to you being very judgmental, led to your self-worth being absolutely in jeopardy of ever being not only supported, but believed in, to where you allowed your life and your actions to mirror your self-worth and the worthiness that you have to be able to live a life free of judgment and pain caused by others because of what they are also projecting onto you. There's also the neuroscience of hostility, and we have to really pay attention to not only the cortisol stress responses that are activated within these enemies and these instances we find ourselves in, but we need to think about how perceived enemies trigger our fight or flight within ourselves in these social situations that are triggering us. When someone becomes your enemy, your nervous system treats interactions with them as survival threats, flooding your body with stress hormones. This psychological response makes rational thinking, empathy, sympathy, and creative problem solving nearly impossible for you to pull out and utilize during these conflicts. Most recently, I had to have a texting back and forth conversation with someone that is and has always been a very volatile relationship. And immediately upon them first texting me, because they started the exchange, my throat got tight, my head got hot. My armpits started sweating. I found my heart starting to race. I could feel it in my artery in my neck. And I had to take a moment and before responding, put down the phone. I said 3 Hail Marys and I asked for peace and just guidance within the conversation and like gave a good Our Father, dear Lord, please help me to just be kind within this conversation and do not allow me to crash out and fly off the handle here at this person. And the conversation, certainly from their end, was not what I hoped would happen, but the typical back and forth catfighting that would typically ensue did not happen. And there were moments where I hoped and prayed that what I was trying to relay with my text had sunk in a little bit, or at the very least caused them to pause and turn down their fight or flight response. There is no way for you to cause the other person to de-escalate in their emotions or the intensity of the interaction you're having with them if you yourself are still at a high level of intensity with your output in that conversation or that instance. Again, the horse to water mentality of being the first horse to drink, we need to take our pride off the shelf and we need to bring it down noticeably a dozen notches to where you are almost whispering compared to their screaming, so that they can see how high up they are and how low you are in the interaction and the energy that is being reciprocated between the two of you, which will hopefully lend them at the very least to calm down a little bit and a little bit more the next time and a little bit more the next time. Nothing that we're discussing in this episode is an overnight switch. Certainly you can decide that you are going to try your very best every day, and that is all we can hope for is 1% growth a day in these beautiful changes that we are trying to implement within ourselves to hopefully have be reflected in the relationships and the world around us on a greater scale. I was also really triggered by confirmation bias amplification, aka gossip. Gossiping. Hostility makes you only see the negative evidence in a person. And when someone becomes your enemy, your brain actively searches for evidence that confirms they're bad and you're good, while filtering out any possibilities of you seeing the good humanistic qualities that they have underneath of this anger or this interaction that you're having with them in this very moment. And hostility creates selective perception that turns neutral behaviors into malicious acts and prevents you from noticing genuine attempts at reconciliation. It also leads you to a space where you are going to only discuss those negative aspects and that interaction that you had with that person with someone else that may have had that same type of relationship or interaction with that person, ultimately leading to gossip that helps no one, is not at all effective in bringing change to the relationship with you and that person you're considering your enemy in this instance, and actively tears down the relationship that you have with the person that you went to gossip with about this terrible thing that happened and they're so bad and this and that. I struggle with this, guys. It's huge, especially when I feel wronged. I now instead actively, every time this happens, turning to God first and praying, because ultimately we just want to be seen and we just want to be heard about the way in which we were wronged. And for me to go to another person and ask for them to witness the wrongdoing done to me is futile. God is the only one who has always seen what has happened. They know what is in your heart. They know what is in the other person's heart. And ultimately, they died for them too. And that is a huge pill for me to swallow regularly throughout the week when I find myself feeling victimized by this enemy that has resided in my head for however many years. Quick sip break. Shout out to Pub and Kitchen. Miss you. So let's talk about rumination cycles, because your girl gets stuck in a tornado, typhoon, whirlwind of rumination. And like, what am I going to say? She's going to say this, then I'm going to say that. And then they're going to bring this up. And then I'm going to bring this up. And then I'm going to have this. And then I'm going to say to them, you're wrong. And here's this. Oh, that got me hot. Just insinuating that. Enemy thinking creates these addictive mental loops where you are the only one stuck, my friend. They don't even know you're having these thought processes. It's not making their behavior change. It's not making you change. It's only anchoring you in fear and anxiety. And thinking about your enemies is also triggering a dopamine response and a release, a wash of dopamine, because planning revenge or rehearsing arguments or, just seeing them as a bad person is only inhibiting progress towards a solution, or at the very least a reconciliation with someone that you could just have no interactions with, bury the bad blood, bury the hatchet, and move forward knowing that at the very least you will not be interacting with that person and you have done your best to leave on good terms. These mental rehearsals that we have with ourselves become addictive, and stealing any kind of mental energy towards productivity or activities you enjoy while keeping you emotionally activated and stressed. I can absolutely attest to the cortisol dumps that I would have from this particular coworker, from family members in my life, and I'll tell you, it has made me sick. It triggered all kinds of autoimmune responses. I am just now in a place after 5 years of actively looking to heal my vagus nerve to repair my stomach issues, to where my stomach issues are now once a month when they used to be daily, every single day for years and years and years. It was making me sick. They were getting no kind of retaliation from me doing this to myself. It was quite literally a prison that I made for myself. And freeing yourself from that prison is not only going to make you feel better, it's going to change your health. And 1% a day, it's going to lead you to make better choices for you, your mental well-being, your physical health, and the community and the structures that you see yourself in with others in your daily life. Now, it's really important that we discuss the cultural amplification of enemy making. Sorry, my cat's snoring, which is so weird. So weird. Their us versus them mentality is just absolutely planted by the other, the devil, the ultimate enemy of us all. And modern culture really encourages enemy interaction. Again, with the reality shows, with the trending things on TikTok and Instagram. And it's all politically and socially anchored in ways that not only are defining people and groups of people by who they oppose rather than what they stand for, it's encouraging enemy-based identities. And religion certainly falls into this practice. The Muslim and Jewish faiths often ostracize, namely Christianity and Catholicism, because it's been embedded into their culture and their upbringing and their learning. And that's certainly not true for everyone, but for the zealots, we'll say there is a ton of imposed bias and hatred that can really cloud the way they interact with those that are different than them. The same can be said of the Christian church to non-believers, and the ways in which righteous judgment and feeling better and holier than thou has led to not only keeping people interested in learning more about the faith, but ultimately has reflected negatively upon Jesus, who has literally nothing to do with your crash outs and your inner child lack of healing and the way in which you project your hatred out towards others in this world. And the quicker that you can get a grasp of that, the safer and more realistically laid out this world can become. And I say this as someone who struggles with this currently. And social media does not help. Guys, get off of Instagram and TikTok. It wants you to be angry at those that are different from you. It is a vile tool, and the algorithm could see you liking one post about something that happened overseas that was an absolutely unrelated terrorist attack to the one minority member of a particular religious group or a particular ideology, that now can have you tainted in your feelings and your thinkings about that entire sect or that entire group of people. It's wrong. It's lazy logic, and it's not focusing on the heart that you have been given by Jesus to look others in the face and say, you are my brother, you are my sister, we are different, but we are all made in God's image, and because of that, I am going to love you because of the sacrifices that Jesus made on the cross for all of us, and that includes you, this person that I have deemed my enemy. Cancel culture and permanent punishment, I think, are like absolutely the worst things to happen in modern society in a very long time. And it really, really, really eliminates any possibility for redemption and any kind of pathways into integrating some type of healing and coming back into the circle and saying, guys, I learned my lesson, I won't do it again. Cancel culture is a virus. It is a mind virus that was put out primarily for political purposes, especially in the United States. Contemporary culture often treats every mistake as a proof of fundamental character flaws, making reconciliation and growth nearly impossible for the offender. And when people can't be forgiven, or they're not allowed to change, or you're not going to recognize their change, you will remain in a permanent state of feeling like they are your enemy, creating chronic stress and creating community fragmentation. It also kind of denotes where your brain is at, because it leaves you to think that you are incapable of having any kind of flaws or doing anything that would get you canceled, or, doing something to gravely harm someone else. Like, for you to consider that someone else is capable of that, but you are not, is absolutely an indicator that you need to look inward and you need to have a conversation with God about who you are, who He made you to be, and how you can go about moving forward to interact with people in a kinder manner and a less judgmental manner. And again, I will say this till I'm blue in the face. I am currently working on this myself, my Richies. So let's all be brave together and work on turning a new leaf every day to grow closer and closer to living the way that Christ lived, which was with peace, harmony, unity, unconditional love, and giving others chance after chance to continue to evolve and grow. The person that I was 20 years ago was a sinner. She was a liar. She was an alcoholic. She was unkind to people. She was judgmental. She was literally squandering away every moment of this gift of life that she was given, knowing how delicate life was because her father had been ill her whole life and he could die at any moment. And that girl from 20 years ago still behaved that way. And I have such compassion for her. She was doing her best. And I certainly couldn't be the person that I am now and continuing to grow into if I didn't have that version of me and the thousands of versions of me that have existed since that 20-year-old girl, 18-year-old girl moved out on her own to start living and experiencing life with a ton of hurt, a ton of anger, rage even, absolute rage. Gosh, bar fights, like the whole nine. Okay, guys, I was hell in a handbasket. And I'm just so grateful for every little 1% choice I made a day that has led me to be the woman that I am today and the woman I'm continuing to grow and to be. And I wish that for you. The freedom that comes with allowing yourself to change, starts with you no longer implementing judgment on others and instead turning that criticalness and that unwavering knowing that they could be better onto yourself. I think there's also a lot to be said about scarcity mindset and the competitive nature that scarcity mindset brings, and believing that there are limited resources, jobs, money, opportunities, boyfriends, girlfriends, you name it, is really, really leading you down a path of just creating unnecessary enemies, or at the very least, just not being happy for others and what beautiful things are happening for them because you think it should be happening for you. When you believe that success, love, or recognition are scarce resources, other people's gains feel like your loss, turning potential allies and people that you could look to ask and see, maybe even have a mentorship with, and try to model your own growth off of some of the things that they did to get into the space of this abundance that you so dearly wish was yours and are very almost gutted that another person got it over you. Scarcity thinking also transforms normal, healthy competition into personal warfare and collaborative opportunities into zero-sum battles. And this was absolutely the case for me in the corporate world. I have been an independent girly for 18 years, and 3 of those years were spent also working a corporate job. And I can't tell you how beastly I was during that time frame, because as a naturally competitive person who I've just always been competitive against myself and wanting to get better every day, that effort turned toward those around me and being really butthurt that people not as smart as me, people who didn't work as hard as me, were getting these higher up positions. And it took me learning that I was aching as a square peg to be shoved into a circle hole. I would have had to cut parts of myself away to fit into that framework that was lower than me, that did not deserve me, because it had relied on less than proper morals to operate and act as a community, as a business, and ultimately as an office of coworkers. So how do we get to a space of implementing some solutions? First, we're going to focus on prayer and the prayer solution and how interceding for your enemies transforms everything in your life. Now, what happens when you pray for your enemies? First, imagine what we'll call heart surgery on yourself. Prayer changes your internal state towards difficult people, and praying for your enemies begins as discipline but becomes genuine compassion as you start seeing them through the divine lens of God's love for them rather than through your worldly human perspective. When you regularly bring someone to God in prayer, you can't maintain that same level of hatred or animosity because you're inviting divine love into this relationship, even if it's only on your end, and this is never something they know that you are doing for them. They'll be able to see it in the ways in which you operate differently around them with more love rather than hatred. There also comes a perspective shift, and this was, for me, the most exciting part because I started to see the change taking hold. I started to feel myself softening toward these people that I felt were my enemies or different than me or were causing me harm or issues. And the spiritual intercession of prayer revealed my hidden humanity that I had been hiding from myself with all this anger and rage, and it also exposes their hidden humanity that I had never even given a second thought about because I was only focused on the bad things that they were doing to me. Praying for someone forces you to consider their struggles, their wounds, and their needs rather than their annoying or harmful behaviors and actions. Through prayer, you begin to see your enemies as broken people needing healing rather than evil people deserving punishment. And again, we are those people as well. We have done these things to others, and we forget very quickly when someone has done it to us. And I just encourage you to take a quiet moment with yourself and really think about the times you've caused harm to others. It really does bring in a perspective that life is an ever-evolving journey, and there are going to be moments where you are hurt by others, and there are going to be moments where you feel wronged. But it is helpful to remember that you yourself have hurt and wronged others, and you deserve change, and you deserve to be forgiven in the same way that they deserve to be heard and changed and forgiven. Now, there is the adage of spiritual warfare and understanding what that means and how prayer can address the deeper spiritual dynamics that you may find within this enemy interaction. Jesus taught that our real battle isn't against the flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces that influence human behavior. When you pray for your enemies, you're addressing the spiritual roots of their conflict rather than just managing the surface level behavioral problems that they are relying on in their human meat suit. Now, what about the neuroscience of intercessory prayer? First, neuroplasticity. We talk about that a lot here. I've got over 50 episodes about neuroplasticity. It was something I really anchored myself into as a way to rewire and change all the negative habits and things that I didn't like about myself and replace them with healthier, more loving and understanding habits. And when we pray, our brain rewires towards empathy rather than hatred. Regular prayer for difficult people literally changes your brain structure. It strengthens neural pathways that were associated previously in a negative manner, not allowing compassion to come through, and it weakens pathways that are associated with hostility. And this act of intercessory prayer activates the same brain regions involved in empathy and emotional regulation, creating lasting changes in how you process difficult relationships. There's also something to be said about the stress reduction mechanisms that prayer invites into your nervous system, namely a calming, peaceful effect. Prayer shifts your nervous system from fight or flight into rest and digest mode, making rational thinking and creative problem solving possible again. The physiological changes that occur during prayer create optimal conditions for relationship repair and conflict resolution because you have removed yourself from the equation and you have given this issue or these feelings up to God. Cognitive reframing is huge, and prayer naturally creates healthier thought patterns through the rewiring of our neuroplasticity, as we just discussed. Praying for your enemies requires you to practice cognitive reframing and looking at alternative explanations for their behavior and focusing on the potential rather than their problems. This mental exercise strengthens your overall capacity for positive thinking, and it's going to absolutely reduce the automatic negative thought patterns in all relationships that you've relied upon when you feel victimized by these other people. I absolutely should have been feeling nothing but empathy for this higher up and her home life and the ways in which she felt she had failed people as a mother and the inadequacies she felt in getting this position and thinking that she didn't have what it took to do it properly. And instead, I took everything she said to me and I went, yeah, you are a terrible mother. Yeah, you shouldn't have this job. You're an idiot. What? What, girl? That was not kind. It was not correct. And it was absolutely removing the part of God in her that kept her going every day. And I was just looking at the parts of her that had been fueled by these really negative, terrible habits that were given to her by the other. Now, how can we go about inciting a mindset transformation? We need to go from victim to victor, and prayer shifts you from reactive to proactive stances. And when you pray for your enemies, you move from feeling powerless and victimized to taking spiritual authority over the situation through intercession. It's a mailman. Comes every day. Corden, baby. Thank you. Lay it on down, girl. Lay it on down, girl. Thank you. They're gonna come back. They are. They are gonna come back. Just wait for them to leave, shall we? What do I say? Hey, no thank you. No thank you. Thank you. Hey, Sophie. Nah. Bubby. Look, they didn't even stop. Bye-bye. Phoebe, she is so loud. Bye-bye. Sorry. Hey, now on this prayer journey, you're going to find that you are able to move from judgment to curiosity, and this intercession of prayer develops investigative compassion rather than judgment. Prayer naturally leads to questions like, who hurt them and how can they be healed, rather than why are they so terrible? This curiosity-based approach opens possibilities for understanding and resolution that judgment-based thinking completely closes off and makes impossible. We need to go from scarcity to abundance, and having a divine perspective that comes from prayer reveals unlimited resources that you have at your disposal to be able to not only strengthen your relationship with this person, but ultimately heal yourself in the process. Prayer connects you to divine abundance and eliminating the scarcity thinking that turns normal competition into personal warfare. When you're praying for your enemy's success and blessings, you discover that their gain does not require your loss. God's resources are unlimited and overwhelmingly abundant. Now, what is a practical prayer approach for our enemies? First, we have blessing prayers. I needed to have concrete resources when I took this journey with God because I was just getting triggered left and right and just feeling like you're the literal opposite of what I see mirrored in God. And like, I hate you for that. And then that was just so wrong of me. But starting with blessing prayers was the easiest thing for me. And I wanted to be able to pray for my enemy's genuine good, even though it felt wrong, difficult, upsetting. It was possible. So you have to start by praying for basic human needs, their health, their safety, their peace, even when you don't feel like it. You want to progress to praying for their success, their happiness, their spiritual growth, allowing God to change your heart as you speak these words. I believe it was Father Mike of Ascension Press and the Hallow app that said that how can we expect God to bless us with abundant resources and blessings if we're not praying for that exact thing for our enemies and more? Like, he prays for his enemies to have more than him, be more abundant, more peaceful, more happy. And that really struck a chord with me, especially for, people within my familial life that I have difficult relationships with. Also, being able to understand prayers in general and learning to pray for insight into difficult people. I would ask God to help me see what wounds or fears that they have that might be driving this difficult behavior or why they're taking it out on me. And I started praying for wisdom about how to respond to them in ways that promote healing rather than escalating conflict. Like the example I gave earlier of praying the Hail Marys a few times before responding to this person so that I wouldn't hop into the old habit of just flying off the frickin' Richter scale in rage at them because they were annoying my peace at the very least. There's also something that I'm starting to implement now, which are protection prayers and praying for boundaries while maintaining love. And you can do this really easily, and I recommend that you start today because praying for protection from any genuine harm they may cause you while also praying for their transformation kind of leaves the issue resolved. You've handed it over to God. You've told him you're concerned about what they're doing to you with their behavior, and you're asking for God to heal them so that that behavior no longer persists, both for their benefit and for your benefit. Ask God to work in their heart while also asking God to give them wisdom about appropriate boundaries and the ways that they should exist in a relationship. And also pray for you to receive that same ability to place healthy, respectful boundaries within relationships that are difficult or with people you consider your enemy. Now let's talk about the faith factor. Jesus has modeled enemy love for us in such a beautiful way. Loving our enemies is a commandment, and understanding the most countercultural instructions that have ever been given will truly free you from any kind of anchorings in the flesh that you'll find on this planet. Jesus didn't just suggest loving enemies as a nice idea, he commanded it. And it is essential to following him and experiencing a divine life. This teaching was so radical that even his disciples struggled with it, yet Jesus modeled it perfectly throughout his life and his death. If you're familiar with God's story at all, and certainly his story of the Passion, he asked for God, his Father, to forgive those that were crucifying him because they did not know what they were doing. He literally asked for them to be spared, even though what they were doing was beyond comprehension, absolutely reprehensible, completely of the devil. And God literally took that and ran with it by giving us all the salvation that was given by Jesus' life on the cross as a way for all of us to have the ability to start fresh every day without being condemned to hell because of us doing one sin or one evil thing to a person. The theological foundation of Jesus' revolutionary teaching and ultimately why enemy love is central to the Christian faith is because loving your enemies demonstrates divine nature because God loved humanity when we were his enemies through sin and rebellion. Enemy love also proves that God's power is working in you because it's impossible to accomplish through human love alone and human effort alone. There's also the principles of God's kingdom, and enemy love advances God's kingdom on earth. When you love your enemies, you demonstrate what God's kingdom looks like and gives others permission to experience that divine transformation within themselves. Again, the horse, leading the horses to water, being the first horse to take a drink. Enemy love also breaks cycles of retaliation and revenge that keep communities trapped in conflict and dysfunction that is from the other. Now, again, we talked about Jesus forgiving his executioners and how he prayed for his enemies while suffering his absolute worst possible days of his life. But let's talk about a couple more examples of enemy love. First, he dined with his opponents. Jesus maintained relationships with people who opposed him. He ate with tax collectors, Pharisees, and other people who are actively working against him or exploiting others. He also distinguished between opposing someone's actions and rejecting them as a person, maintaining relationships while confronting their wrong behavior. Jesus also literally transformed enemies into disciples, and his love converted opponents into allies. Some of Jesus' closest followers were initially his enemies. Paul persecuted Christians before becoming Christianity's greatest advocate. Divine love has the power to transform hearts and souls in ways that argument, manipulation, and force never can. There's also the power of divine love and the supernatural enablement that comes with allowing the power of divine love to not only change the way that you interact with others, but it allows God's love through you to accomplish what your human effort cannot do alone. You can love your enemies through divine power and the love of God flowing through you. And it's, how can I say this? Emotional self-manipulation or positive thinking on your own is not going to make any changes happen with the other person. You have to love them with the divine power flowing through all of us so that they can feel that divine love in themselves. And we have to remember that divine love is a gift that we receive and a channel rather than an emotion that you manufacture through human will. Transformative outcomes are incredible when we allow divine love to create miraculous relationship changes. And when you give it up to God and you allow him to take the wheel, you can love your enemies with God's love, and you will often see supernatural changes in their behavior and their attitude towards you. Oftentimes there will be a forgiveness factor that comes in to where they are very easily able to forgive you for the things they thought that you did to them, but they will also ask forgiveness of you and what they have done to you. Even when they don't change, though, you are experiencing the peace and freedom that comes from obeying not only the divine commands that God has given us, but you are disassociated from and unattached to the results. The way that you treat them is not hinging on how and what their reaction will be to you. There's also witness and testimony of how enemy love demonstrates divine reality to others. We always want to model ourselves in a way that shows when we love people genuinely, especially those that have hurt us, others are going to witness something that only makes sense is if God is real and active. Your enemy love becomes a powerful testimony in divine transformation and invites others to experience the same spiritual reality. So what is the practical faith application that we can walk away from here? Because I want to make sure that you are getting some tips and tools here to start today with this work. First, I like to do a bit of daily surrender. I need to access divine love for difficult people, and I do it by starting each day surrendering my enemies to God and asking for his love to flow through me towards them. I also acknowledge that I cannot manufacture genuine love for enemies, and I invite divine assistance for what is an impossible task for us to do alone as humans in this meat suit. I will then move to scripture meditation. God's word can transform our perspective on our enemies so quickly, and I like to regularly read and meditate on Bible passages about loving my enemies that are going to renew my mind and strengthen my resolve on this journey. I really like to also allow the scriptures to let divine truth about enemy love replace the human wisdom and free will that I have about conflict, revenge, and relationship management and manipulation. You also need to think about community support. Having fellowship with other believers strengthens your enemy love practice. And we want to avoid gossip and leaning into the hatred. And we want to find community and just accordance with people that are also on the path of practicing enemy love. We want to share our struggles with those that are loving their enemies and with true, mature believers who can pray with you and hold you accountable to these divine standards. And when we learn from others who have successfully transformed their own enemy relationships through faith and prayer, we do kind of feel a little bit more emboldened to continue ourselves on that journey for those we have difficulties with and at the very least, unsatisfactory relationships. Now, I want you to think about the mindset shifts that are necessary for you to transform a difficult relationship. First, we need to redefine our enemies, how we see difficult people as assignments rather than obstacles. And every difficult person in your life is opportunity for character development and spiritual growth rather than an inconvenience to endure or avoid. God often uses challenging relationships in our lives to develop qualities in you that can't be developed any other way. You cannot purchase growth, guys. It comes from the suffering of interacting with someone in a rather unsavory way. There's also the expectation of judgment, and realistic expectations prevent relationship disappointment. Expecting difficult people to be difficult is just setting yourself up for failure. We need to pray and work towards improvement without demanding immediate change. We need to understand that the way in which you grow 1% a day is also the way your enemies grow 1% a day. And this is not a sprint. This is a marathon of behavior changes both on your part and on their part. When we focus on our growth and response rather than their transformation, it then kind of puts it on God, right? It's God's responsibility, and it's on his timeline, which ultimately our entire life is on his timeline. And respecting that can really take away a lot of the responsibility and the feeling of heaviness and the chains that weigh you down in this difficult relationship being something you can't avoid in your life. I also want you to consider redefining success, and, measuring relationship success by your character rather than their behavior is also going to free you. When we allow difficult relationships to find success in the growth, we get to maintain measures of love, respect, and appropriate boundaries regardless of their response. We do not want to move back the tape. We always want to be moving forward in yards of our growth, irrespective of their response and what they're going to do and their reactions. When you succeed to respond like Jesus would, you not only get a different neural pathway being formed for you, but you can eventually start to get the behavior you wish for from others because they are seeing you change. Now, I want to touch briefly on communication strategies for you to be less triggered in the moment, because this was really big for me, and this is honestly where I find myself ready to go to moment's notice. So I speak all of this to you with such kindness and empathy in my heart for your current journey of growth here. We got this. First, we want to listen for pain. We want to hear the hurt beneath the difficult behavior. Most difficult behavior stems from unhealed wounds, so we need to listen for the pain driving their actions rather than just reacting to surface behaviors. And when you respond to someone's pain instead of their problematic behavior, you often diffuse conflict and create connection. We also want to speak to their potential and how we address people's highest self rather than their current dysfunctional self that you're interacting with. We need to talk to people as if they're capable of growth and change rather than treating them as permanently problematic, because that's not fair. Your words have the power to call forth either someone's best or their worst qualities, and we need to choose to summon their divine potential in every interaction that we have with them, because we are on this journey of change, and we cannot expect them to behave in the same manner if they are not on that journey of change. You also need to set loving boundaries. You need to protect yourself while maintaining the relationship, and boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, but they're guidelines to keep relationships healthy, sustainable, and respectful. You can limit harmful behavior without rejecting the person. Separate their actions from their identity. When we begin to seek to understand first, we can de-escalate the current scenario and situation you find yourself in with genuine curiosity. Before defending your position, genuinely try to understand their perspective and where they're coming from, and what are the needs driving this behavior. Most conflicts escalate because people feel unheard, and giving someone your full attention often resolves more than arguing does. I would say most times it resolves more than arguing does. You also need to look for a common ground and how to build a bridge through these shared values and goals. And you want to look for areas where you agree rather than focusing exclusively on differences, and build from commonality towards a resolution. Even our enemies usually share some basic human needs and values that can serve as a foundation for an improved relationship. There are no lost causes, just longer, bigger journeys. We also want to think about apologizing strategically, and authentic accountability on our part can transform relationships very quickly. When we take responsibility for our contributions to conflict without accepting blame for their behavior, we allow our genuine apology to kind of create space for them to acknowledge their role rather than continuing defensive cycles. I really do think that there is so much beauty in just this difficult work of looking at our enemies as humans. And for me, it took just looking at them as babies. Like, imagine this person is a crying 3-year-old with a wet diaper that needs a nap and also a little banana. Like, it really does bring down so much in the reactive side of your output in the relationship when you can just envision them as a tiny little baby that needs love and to be seen and to be heard and to be recognized and to be invested in with love. All of this I say with a huge grain of salt because I am currently in the middle of this journey, my Richies, and I just thank you so much for tuning in every episode to just grow with me 1% more a day. We are doing God's work. It is difficult, but there is no sweetness without the suffering, and I can tell you absolutely that it is worth every moment of uncomfortability that happens in those early stages of trying to not only build a bridge with your enemies, but ultimately lead to a place where neither of you are conflicted, and at the very least, you can very cordially leave each other alone. This world requires so much unconditional love. We all ultimately hope for peace and just to feel safe and honored within our life and the way that we're moving forward with our day-to-day actions. And I really just hope and pray that this episode will help you a little bit through what is a very difficult part of growth within our life. It means so much to have you tuning in every episode, my Richies, and I cannot wait to see you in our next episode. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and as always, make life rich. God bless.